The Golden Crown Hotel stood tall and proud in the heart of Manhattan, its gleaming windows reflecting the city lights like countless stars. Inside, the marble floors sparkled, and crystal chandeliers cast warm glows across the elegant lobby. But behind this picture of luxury was James Washington, a 68-year-old janitor whose careful hands had helped maintain this grandeur for over 20 years. James was the kind of person who found joy in the smallest details of his work. Every evening, as the sun set behind the city's skyline, he would arrive at the hotel with his well-worn cleaning cart, its wheels squeaking softly against the polished floors. The night shift suited him well. There was something peaceful about working while most of the city slept. The old janitor had a routine he perfected over the years. He'd start from the top floor, methodically working his way down, making sure every corner gleamed. The other night staff knew him as the gentleman who always had a kind word to share and a chocolate candy in his pocket for anyone having a rough night. But things had changed at the Golden Crown in recent months. The passing of the old owner, Mr. Robert Maxwell, had brought his son Richard to take over the hotel's operations. The difference between father and son was like night and day. Where the elder Maxwell would stop to chat with every employee, remembering their children's names and asking about their families, Richard barely acknowledged the staff's existence. James remembered how Robert Maxwell had hired him all those years ago. "A hotel is only as good as the people who take care of it," the old man had said, shaking James's hand firmly. Those words had stuck with James through all the late nights, holiday shifts, and countless hours of maintaining the hotel's pristine standards. Now, under Richard's leadership, the warm family atmosphere that had made the Golden Crown special was fading. New rules appeared daily, break times were cut short, and the friendly morning greetings turned into silent nods. Yet James continued his work with the same dedication, believing that good work spoke for itself. One particular evening, as James was starting his shift, he overheard some of the younger staff talking about Richard's latest changes. "He's bringing in consultants," one whispered. "They say he wants to modernize everything." James just smiled and adjusted his name tag, which he kept polished just as bright as the floors he cleaned. The night shift was James's world. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every flickering light that needed reporting, and every corner where dust liked to hide. The overnight guests who'd run into him in the hallways often mistook him for a manager, given his professional appearance and thorough knowledge of the hotel. He took pride in keeping his uniform crisp and clean, even during the most demanding tasks. That night, like every other, James checked his cleaning supplies before starting his rounds. His cart was organized with military precision, glass cleaner on the left, disinfectants on the right, and his special microfiber cloths neatly folded in the middle compartment. Each tool had its place, just like he believed each person had their purpose. As he pushed his cart toward the service elevator, James caught his reflection in one of the lobby's giant mirrors. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and his uniform was spotless as always. The lines on his face told stories of years of early mornings and late nights, of missed family dinners and worked holidays, but also of pride in a job well done. He straightened his back, adjusted his tie, and smiled at his reflection, ready for another night of keeping the Golden Crown living up to its name. Little did James know that this ordinary night was about to become extraordinary, and his quiet dignity would be put to the test in ways he never imagined. The elevator doors opened with their familiar ding, and James stepped inside, unaware that upstairs, fate was setting the stage for a night that would change not just his life, but the entire culture of the Golden Crown Hotel. The executive bathroom on the top floor of the Golden Crown Hotel was James's next stop that evening. He took special pride in this particular space, with its imported marble countertops and gold-plated fixtures that needed extra care to maintain their shine. The clock on the wall showed 9:45 p.m. as he carefully arranged his cleaning supplies, preparing for his usual thorough job. The bathroom's soft lighting reflected off the pristine surfaces, creating an almost peaceful atmosphere. James had just started wiping down the mirrors when he heard the heavy wooden door swing open. Through the reflection, he saw Richard Maxwell stride in, his expensive suit as crisp as ever and his shoes clicking against the tiled floor. James offered a polite "Good evening, Mr. Maxwell," just as he had done countless times with the young owner's father. But Richard barely glanced his way, instead pulling out his phone and leaning against the counter while typing rapidly. The silence in the room was broken only by the gentle squeak of James's cleaning cloth against the mirror and the tap-tap-tap of Richard's fingers on his phone screen. What happened next started so quietly that it was almost like watching storm clouds gather on a sunny day. Richard, still focused on his phone, began speaking not directly to James, but about him, as if the elderly janitor were merely part of the furniture. "You know," he said to no one in particular, his voice echoing off the bathroom walls, "when I took over this place, I expected to see some changes by now." James continued his work, moving methodically from one mirror to the next, his movements steady and practiced. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. But Richard wasn't finished. He pushed himself away from the counter and walked closer to where James was working. "I mean, look at this," Richard continued, gesturing vaguely around the bathroom. "We've got senior citizens cleaning our executive spaces. How does that look to our high-end clients?" His voice carried that particular tone of someone who thought they were being clever. "Shouldn't you be home watching TV or something? Playing with grandkids?" The words hung in the air like heavy smoke, but James maintained his composure. His hands never faltered as he moved to clean the next surface, his movements as precise as ever. He thought about his daughter's words from their Sunday dinner last week. "Dad, your dignity isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you carry yourself." Richard, apparently encouraged by James's silence, leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "You know, my father was too soft. Always talking about loyalty and experience. But this is a luxury hotel, not a retirement home." He laughed at his own joke, the sound bouncing harshly off the marble walls. James felt the weight of his years of service in every word, but his face remained calm. He remembered all the times the senior Maxwell had praised his work, all the holiday bonuses that had helped put his daughter through college, all the genuine thank yous from guests who appreciated his attention to detail. Unknown to both men, the last bathroom stall door was closed, its occupant sitting in complete silence. The tension in the room continued to build as Richard launched into another monologue about modernizing the hotel staff, each word more cutting than the last. But James just kept working, his movements deliberate and dignified. As James began packing up his supplies, carefully arranging each bottle and cloth in its proper place on his cart, Richard checked his expensive watch and sighed dramatically. "Well, I suppose this is what I'm stuck with for now. At least try to finish before any real guests come in, okay?" The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the sound filling the space between Richard's words and James's silence. The elderly janitor's reflection in the now spotless mirrors showed a man standing straight and tall, his uniform still perfectly pressed despite hours of work. His face carried no trace of the hurt or anger that Richard's words might have caused. Only the same peaceful expression he wore every night as he went about his duties. Little did Richard Maxwell know that his words weren't just bouncing off the bathroom walls, they were being absorbed by someone whose opinion could change everything. And in just a few moments, the true measure of a man's character would be revealed in ways that neither James nor Richard could have anticipated. Inside the last stall of the executive bathroom, Donald Trump sat in complete silence, his hand frozen mid-reach for the toilet paper. He hadn't planned on becoming an invisible witness to this scene. He'd simply stopped at the Golden Crown Hotel after a lengthy business meeting about a potential new development project in the city. The bathroom's excellent acoustics meant he hadn't missed a single word of Richard Maxwell's cruel monologue. Each degrading comment echoed clearly off the marble walls, painting a picture that grew uglier by the minute. Trump remembered Robert Maxwell, Richard's father, as a man who had built this hotel's reputation on foundations of respect and dignity. He'd known the elder Maxwell for decades and had always admired how he treated every employee like family. Through the gap in the stall door, Trump could see fragments of the scene playing out. He watched James's reflection in the mirrors, the elderly janitor's steady hands never faltering as he worked, his back straight despite the weight of the words being thrown at him. Trump had seen James during his many visits to the hotel over the years, always impressed by the man's quiet professionalism and attention to detail. The businessman felt his jaw tighten as Richard continued his thoughtless tirade. In all his years of running hotels and businesses, Trump had learned that it wasn't the shine of the chandeliers or the thread count of the sheets that made a hotel truly luxurious. It was the people who poured their hearts into maintaining those standards day after day, night after night. As he listened, Trump remembered his own father's words about judging a person's character not by how they treated their equals, but by how they treated those they thought couldn't fight back. Here was Richard Maxwell, failing that test spectacularly, completely unaware that his every word was being absorbed by someone who could change the hotel's future with a single phone call. The sound of James's cleaning cart being packed up caught Trump's attention. Through the gap, he could see the janitor methodically arranging his supplies, his movements unhurried and precise despite Richard's continuing commentary. The dignity in James's silence spoke volumes more than any heated response could have. Trump had been considering a substantial investment in the Golden Crown's planned expansion. The hotel's prime location and stellar reputation made it an attractive opportunity. But now, sitting in that bathroom stall, he was getting a behind-the-scenes glimpse of how things had changed under the new management, and he didn't like what he was seeing one bit. The businessman shifted slightly, the leather of his expensive shoes making the softest sound against the floor. Neither James nor Richard seemed to notice, too caught up in their roles in this uncomfortable drama. Trump watched as James gave the mirrors one final check, his reflection showing a face that maintained its dignity despite every attempt to strip it away. Richard's voice had taken on an almost bored tone now, as if he'd grown tired of his own cruelty. "Well, I suppose that's enough excitement for one evening," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Trying to pick up the pace next time, okay? We're not running a charity here." Trump felt his hand curl into a fist. He'd sat through enough. The time had come to remind young Richard Maxwell about something his father had clearly failed to teach him, that true leadership wasn't about throwing your weight around, but about lifting others up. As James began to wheel his cart toward the door, Trump reached for the stall's latch. In just a few seconds, he would step out and turn this ordinary evening into a moment that would change the course of many lives. The bathroom's bright lights were about to illuminate more than just its spotless surfaces. They were about to shine a harsh light on the darkness of prejudice and the power of accountability. The sound of the bathroom stall door opening seemed unusually loud in the tense quiet of the executive bathroom. James had just reached for his cleaning cart's handle when the distinct click of expensive shoes against marble made him pause. Behind him, Richard Maxwell was still leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Donald Trump emerged from the last stall, his tall figure reflected in the freshly cleaned mirrors. The fluorescent lights caught his signature hairstyle and the crisp lines of his business suit as he stepped into full view. Richard's head snapped up at the movement, and the phone nearly slipped from his suddenly limp fingers. "Mr. T. Trump," Richard stammered, his face draining of color so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His eyes darted between the businessman and the janitor, making the connections that had been invisible to him just moments before. The bathroom suddenly felt much smaller than its generous dimensions would suggest. Trump's expression was stern as he straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed to fill the silent space with unspoken authority. "You know, Richard," he began, his voice carrying that distinctive tone that had closed countless deals and commanded countless boardrooms, "I've been coming to the Golden Crown for over 20 years. James stood quietly by his cart, his hands folded respectfully in front of him. The same dignity that had carried him through Richard's cruel comments remained evident in his posture, even as the scene took this unexpected turn. "Your father," Trump continued, taking a step forward, "was one of the finest hoteliers I've ever known. He understood something that seems to have escaped you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air. He knew that a hotel's true worth isn't measured in its marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It's measured in the dedication of people like James here. Richard's attempt to speak resulted in a sound somewhere between a cough and a squeak. The young hotel owner's previous arrogance had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. His eyes kept darting toward the door, but Trump's imposing presence seemed to block any thought of escape. "I've watched James work for years," Trump went on, his voice carrying a warmth when he mentioned the janitor's name. "Every time I've stayed here, I've noticed how spotless everything is, how every detail is perfect. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of people who take pride in their work, regardless of their age or any other factor you seem so concerned about." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the gentle hum of the ventilation system and the faint tick of Richard's expensive watch, counting out the seconds of his humiliation. James remained still, his face betraying no satisfaction at this turn of events, showing the same professional composure he'd maintained throughout the evening. "I had a meeting earlier today," Trump continued, his tone shifting to one he typically reserved for business discussions. "Your expansion plans for the Golden Crown are ambitious. I was considering taking a significant stake in the project." He emphasized the word "was" in a way that made Richard flinch. The young hotel owner's face, which had been pale just moments before, now flushed red. The realization of what his behavior might have cost the hotel seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Trump turned slightly to address James directly, his tone notably different. "Would you mind staying for a moment, James? I believe Mr. Maxwell has something he'd like to say." It wasn't really a question, and everyone in the room knew it. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as the three men stood there, surrounded by gleaming marble and spotless mirrors. In the harsh bathroom lighting, it was hard to tell who looked more uncomfortable, Richard Maxwell, facing the consequences of his actions, or James Washington, finding himself suddenly at the center of attention he had never sought. The next few minutes would determine not just the future of the Golden Crown Hotel, but more importantly, whether a valuable lesson about human dignity and respect would be learned or lost. The executive bathroom had never felt so quiet. The soft hum of the ventilation system seemed to underscore the tension as Donald Trump stood between Richard Maxwell and James Washington, his presence commanding the space like a judge in his courtroom. The gleaming mirrors reflected the scene from multiple angles: a young hotel owner whose arrogance had finally caught up with him, an elderly janitor whose dignity remained unshaken, and a billionaire businessman whose unexpected appearance had changed everything. "You know," Trump began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of business experience, "I remember when your father first opened this hotel. He gave me a personal tour, but it wasn't the fancy fixtures or the expensive furniture he was most proud of." He paused, letting his words sink in. It was his staff. He knew every single person by name, from the head chef to the night cleaners. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his designer shoes squeaking against the spotless floor. The mention of his father seemed to deflate what little remained of his previous swagger. His eyes kept darting between Trump and James, as if seeing the elderly janitor clearly for the first time. "James here," Trump continued, gesturing toward the quiet janitor, "has been maintaining these bathrooms longer than you've been alive. Every business meeting I've had here, every deal I've closed in this building, it's all happened in spaces he's kept pristine. That's not just a job, Richard. That's craftsmanship." James stood quietly by his cleaning cart, his hands folded in front of him. His face showed neither triumph nor resentment, just the same professional composure he'd maintained throughout the evening. The cart's bottles and cleaning supplies were still perfectly arranged, a small but telling detail about the man who operated it. "I was seriously considering investing in your expansion plans," Trump said, his tone shifting to business. "The numbers looked good, the location is perfect, and the Golden Crown's reputation is solid. But you know what matters more than all of that?" He waited until Richard met his gaze. "People. The right people, treated the right way, are worth more than any marble lobby or penthouse suite." Richard's throat worked as he swallowed hard. The reality of what his behavior might cost the hotel seemed to finally hit home. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Trump, I don't know what to say." "Then let me help you out," Trump replied firmly. "Start with an apology. A real one. Not because I'm here, not because of the investment, but because it's the right thing to do." The young hotel owner turned to face James, and for a moment he seemed to struggle with his words. The bathroom lights cast harsh shadows on his face, highlighting his discomfort. "Mr. Washington," he began, his voice cracking slightly, I'm truly sorry. My behavior was inexcusable. You've served this hotel faithfully for years, and I treated you with complete disrespect." James nodded slowly, his eyes meeting Richard's. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell," he said simply, his voice carrying neither bitterness nor triumph. It was the voice of a man who had seen enough of life to understand that sometimes the greatest victories come wrapped in the simplest moments. Trump watched the exchange carefully, years of reading people allowing him to gauge its sincerity. "Well," he said after a moment, "that's a start. But actions speak louder than words, don't they?" He pulled out his phone, checking the time. "I have another meeting tomorrow morning. I'd like to discuss those expansion plans again. But this time, I want to hear about your plans for the people who make this hotel what it is." The implication was clear. Redemption was possible, but it would need to be earned. Richard nodded quickly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The lesson being taught went far beyond business. It was about basic human dignity and respect. As the tension in the room began to ease, James quietly reached for his cleaning cart. The wheels squeaked softly against the floor, a familiar sound in an evening that had been anything but ordinary. Before he could leave, Trump placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "James, I'd like you to be part of tomorrow's meeting too," he said. "I think your experience here could be valuable in shaping the hotel's future." The elderly janitor's eyes widened slightly, the only break in his composed demeanor all evening. The bathroom's bright lights continued to shine off the spotless surfaces, but now they seemed to illuminate something else as well: the possibility of change, the power of accountability, and the enduring strength of human dignity. The next few weeks at the Golden Crown Hotel brought changes that nobody could have predicted that fateful night in the executive bathroom. The story of what happened spread through the hotel staff like wildfire, though in whispered conversations rather than loud gossip. It wasn't every day that a billionaire businessman stood up for a night shift janitor. Richard Maxwell's transformation began the very next morning. He arrived at work earlier than usual, the dark circles under his eyes suggesting a sleepless night of reflection. The first thing he did was call a full staff meeting, something his father used to do regularly, but Richard had dismissed as a waste of time. The hotel's grand ballroom, usually reserved for high society weddings and corporate galas, hosted all 3 shifts of employees that morning. The cleaning staff, who normally only saw these rooms empty and in need of attention, found themselves sitting in the plush chairs usually occupied by guests. James Washington sat in the front row, his uniform as crisp as ever, his presence a quiet reminder of why they were all there. "I owe all of you an apology," Richard began, his voice carrying across the silent room. He stood at the podium, but his usual air of superiority was gone. Instead, he seemed smaller, more human. "Last night, I was taught a valuable lesson about respect, dignity, and what really makes this hotel special. It's not our marble floors or our fancy suites, it's each one of you." The staff exchanged glances, many of them having experienced Richard's previous dismissive attitude firsthand. But there was something different in his tone now, something that made even the most skeptical employees lean forward and listen. Richard announced immediate changes to the hotel's policies. Break times were restored to their previous lengths. The rushed staff meals were replaced with proper dining options. Most significantly, he established an employee advisory board to provide input on hotel operations, with James Washington named as its first chairperson. The changes weren't just on paper. Richard began showing up in different departments, not to criticize but to learn. He spent a morning with the housekeeping staff, attempting to make beds to their exacting standards. He joined the kitchen crew during a busy lunch service, witnessing firsthand the choreographed chaos that produced the hotel's acclaimed cuisine. He even signed up for a night shift, working alongside the cleaning crew he had once looked down upon. James watched these changes with quiet satisfaction, never boasting about his role in the hotel's transformation. When younger staff members would thank him for inspiring the changes, he would simply smile and redirect the conversation to their work, their families, their dreams, just as he had always done. The hotel's atmosphere shifted noticeably. The tension that had filled the corridors under Richard's earlier management melted away. Employees began sharing ideas for improvements, knowing they would be heard. The genuine warmth that had been the hotel's trademark under the elder Maxwell began to return. 1 month after the incident, Donald Trump returned to the Golden Crown for a follow-up meeting. He found a different hotel than the one he'd visited that fateful night. The physical appearance was the same. The marbles still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, but the spirit of the place had transformed. Walking through the lobby, Trump noticed staff members greeting guests by name, just as they had in the old days. He saw Richard chatting with a bellhop about his son's college applications, genuinely interested in the conversation. and he spotted James, still performing his duties with the same quiet dignity, but now wearing a new name tag that read Advisory Board Chair beneath his name. The formal apology Richard had promised was delivered not in words but in actions. He had established a college scholarship fund for employees' children, naming it after his father. The first recipient would be James's granddaughter, though James had initially tried to decline the honor. Even the executive bathroom, where it had all started, saw changes. A plaque appeared on its wall, bearing a quote from the elder Maxwell: "True luxury is not in the surroundings, but in the way we treat each other." Below it, in smaller letters, was the date of that transformative night, serving as a permanent reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons come in the most unexpected moments. 6 months after that fateful night in the executive bathroom, the Golden Crown Hotel had become a different place entirely. The physical changes were subtle, the same elegant lobby, the same sparkling chandeliers, but the spirit of the place had undergone a complete transformation. It was as if the hotel had finally remembered its soul. On a crisp autumn morning, Donald Trump stood in the hotel's grand ballroom, surrounded by the entire staff for a special announcement. The expansion plans he had once doubted were now moving forward, but with a unique twist that had made headlines in the hospitality industry. The Golden Crown would grow not just in size, but in purpose. Richard Maxwell, standing at the podium, looked nothing like the arrogant young owner of 6 months ago. His designer suit was the same, but his demeanor had changed entirely. He spoke with a new kind of confidence, not the brittle arrogance of privilege, but the solid assurance of someone who had learned valuable lessons the hard way. "When my father built this hotel," Richard began, his voice carrying across the packed room, "he had a vision that I almost destroyed. He knew that luxury isn't just about expensive things, it's about how we treat each other. It took someone with the courage to stand up for what's right, and someone else with the wisdom to teach rather than condemn, to help me understand that." James Washington sat in the front row, his work uniform as immaculate as ever. At 75, he had finally agreed to reduce his hours, but he remained a vital part of the hotel's operations. His new role as head of staff development meant he could share his decades of experience with younger employees, teaching them not just about cleaning techniques, but about dignity in work and the importance of treating every task, no matter how small, with pride. The expansion plans Trump had approved included something unprecedented: a training academy for hotel staff, named in honor of James Washington. The academy would offer free education and certification programs for employees at all levels, from housekeeping to management. It would ensure that the lessons learned at the Golden Crown would spread throughout the industry. Success in business isn't just about profits. Trump addressed the crowd, his distinctive voice filled with conviction. It's about creating value, not just for shareholders, but for everyone involved. What we're doing here at the Golden Crown isn't just about building a bigger hotel. It's about building a better way of doing business. The staff handbook had been completely rewritten, with input from employees at every level. The first page now featured a photograph of James Washington standing proudly in his uniform, below a quote that read, "Excellence is not about your position, but your dedication." The story of that night in the executive bathroom had become part of the hotel's official training program, teaching new employees about the importance of respect and dignity in the workplace. Richard's personal transformation had perhaps been the most remarkable change. He now spent time each week working alongside staff in different departments, continuing the practice he'd started during those first weeks after the incident. He knew the names of his employees' children, celebrated their achievements, and genuinely cared about their well-being. The ghost of his father's legacy, which had once haunted him with feelings of inadequacy, now inspired him to build something even better. The hotel's reputation in the industry had soared, not just for its luxury accommodations, but for its revolutionary approach to staff development and workplace culture. Other hotels had begun sending their managers to study the Golden Crown method, as it had come to be known. The waiting list for employment applications grew longer each month as people heard about the hotel, where every employee was treated with respect and given opportunities to grow. James's original cleaning cart had been retired to a place of honor in the hotel's lobby, displayed behind glass like a museum piece. Next to it, A simple plaque told the story of how one man's dignity and another's intervention had changed not just a hotel, but the lives of hundreds of people who worked there. On his last full-time day before switching to his reduced schedule, James found himself back in that executive bathroom. The marble still gleamed, the fixtures still shone, but now they seemed to reflect something more than just physical light. As he looked in the mirror, straightening his nameplate one last time, he saw Richard's reflection appear behind him. "Thank you," Richard said simply, "for not giving up on me." James smiled, the kind of smile that carried the wisdom of years and the satisfaction of seeing good grow from difficult moments. "Sometimes," he replied, "the greatest gift we can give someone is the chance to become better than they were." The bathroom's new plaque caught the light, its words a permanent reminder that true change is always possible. Character, like these mirrors, shows clearest when kept clean through daily effort. Below it, small but clear, was the date that had changed everything. A reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life happen in the most unexpected places.